Hi, Caitlyn. So, welcome to my podcast, my car radio. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm so happy that you are here and we can chat about your trips and adventures in your life and
So
your
much
music
to talk
taste
about.
as well. So much to talk about, yeah. So, let's start with how we met. Do you remember where we met? I mean, through Twitter?
We met online, like virtually met, and then we met in person, I want to say like 6 or 7 years ago in
Yeah.
Madrid. And then we also recently met this past summer in Slovakia. So lots of worldwide interactions going on.
Yeah, I think so that it was like I remember that we met because we loved Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
So we started talking. At the time, I was a big fan of it, and yeah, we started talking through DMs on Twitter. And then I think so that you were in some kind of like gap year or Erasmus, something like that. What was the last trip that you went to?
Like when I saw you were just in general.
In general, yeah.
I spent 5 weeks in South Africa and it was incredible. I did a whole like 17-day overland safari, going to all the game drives and seeing lions and elephants and everything. And then also got to scuba dive across the entire eastern coast of the country, which was incredible. And I did the whole 5 week trip solo, which was the longest solo
Wow.
trip I've done. And it was definitely an experience that pushed me a bit because South Africa is not really known as being the safest country out there either. So was definitely a great growth and learning experience for me.
That's amazing. That's so good. And through what countries were you in South Africa?
So South Africa itself, the country, and then within South Africa, there's two small countries that are located inside the country of South Africa called Lesotho and Eswatini. So I went to both of those and kind of just as my layovers, I had a day layover on the way there in Egypt and a day layover in Istanbul, Turkey on the way back. So also got to visit those countries on that trip.
That's lovely. And about scuba diving, when did you start?
I started scuba diving about 2.5 years ago in early 2022. I was dating someone at the time who was an underwater videographer. So he had just gotten his scuba license. And we went on one specific trip to the Big Island in Hawaii where he was doing a gig where he got hired to like film an underwater video for them. So he was scuba diving with all these manta rays. It looked amazing. And then I was stuck just snorkeling on the surface. And I was like, this is never going to happen again. Like, if we are going to keep traveling and you're going to keep scuba diving, I refuse to just have the subpar experience on the top of the water. I need to be down there. So
Yeah.
that was actually what motivated me to get scuba certified. I think prior to that, I had done one like intro, like discovery scuba dive, they call it, where you go with a guide the entire time. You're not independent and you just like hold on to them the whole time to experience what diving is like. So I had done that in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia when I first went to Australia because that's kind of just what you feel like you should do when you're in Australia. And I actually didn't have the best experience the first time I went scuba diving. I thought that I was struggling a lot to equalize my ears, and I thought it was giving me pain. And I thought just like maybe scuba diving isn't really for me. But I think that was just because it was one of these very quick intro courses. It didn't really educate me properly about how to equalize my ears, how to approach everything safely, which is why now I highly recommend people to get the full scuba certification and like 2 to 4 day training rather than just doing the discovery dives, because I find that quite often they're just pretty low quality education and they can set you up to think that diving is just not great, but really it's just a lack of the proper skills or knowledge. Um, but yeah, I ever since 2.5 years ago when I got scuba certified, I have now worked my way up to becoming actually a professional diver. I did my dive master certification this past summer in Honduras, and I now lead group trips around the world for scuba diving. So that's been a really fun progression to 3 years ago today. I had never gone scuba diving at all, really, and now it's such a big part of my life.
That's so amazing. That's such good info for somebody who wants to start scuba diving. And
Yeah.
how do you find those courses? How do you find the monitors? Or, I mean, in what places, what websites would you advise people to look into?
Yeah, so if you want to get started with scuba diving, there's basically two ways you can go through. One of them is PADI. That's what I got certified through. It's kind of the biggest, most worldwide known scuba organization. That's PADI. There's also a different one that's pretty up and coming and pretty widely available called SSI. You can get scuba certified through either of those organizations. They're pretty much the same thing. Slight cross differences maybe depending where in the world you are, but I went through PADI for first my open water scuba certification, which means you learn how to dive in general and you're certified to dive with a buddy always up to 60 feet, or I think it's 30 meters. Sorry, what is the conversion? 20 meters deep.
I don't
I
really know
always get
either.
confused with 60 meters, but yeah, 60 feet, 20 meters. That's the basic certification. Then you could get your advanced open water, which certifies you to go to 100 feet or 30 meters deep. And then you can branch off and do all these specialties. Like I had also gotten my deep diver certification, which let me go to 40 meters. I did like a nighttime dive training, so I know how to like use a flashlight and be safe if I want to dive at night and see all the nocturnal creatures. I did a separate training for how to dive with a special type of air that lets you like last a longer time on the bottom of the ocean. So all these crazy things you learn about when you really get into diving, but the basic levels that you would need to know as a recreational diver is just like go to PADI or SSI, or like if you're going on a vacation, let's say you're going to like Australia and you want to try scuba diving and get the certification, just Google like scuba diving, whatever city you're in, and there's going to be tons of dive shops that pop up, and you just pick one of the local dive shops and you go with them. And pretty much anywhere you go in the world, it's the same training booklets, it's the same e-learning where you get the education of like what is scuba diving and how do you do it. The only difference is there's an instructor in person who is going to be teaching you probably a little bit differently depending on their personal experiences, but they're all held to the same standards. So no matter where you go, you're learning the same quality of skills and the same like methods of using the equipment.
That's so amazing. Thanks for that info. If in case that somebody's listening and they would love to start scuba diving, and about your solo trip in South Africa, what was your experience?
It was really interesting. Like I have traveled solo before, not often. I think a lot of people assume that I've solo traveled a lot because I've been to something like 95 countries, but I actually did most of that travel when I was studying abroad during college. So like I studied abroad for one semester in Florence, Italy, and I went all over Europe. And then I studied abroad in Southeast Asia and went all over Southeast Asia. But because I was in a study abroad community of sorts, there were other people my age who were also looking to travel a lot. That's like the point of studying abroad. So I actually pretty much was always able to find one or two or a group of people from those study abroad communities that wanted to go on a long weekend trip with me somewhere else. So I only took one or two solo trips the whole time that I studied abroad for a semester in Europe. I just was like, okay, even if no one can come, I'll send it. I'll go by myself anyway. And that was only really 2 or 3 days maximum that I was by myself. So it felt manageable at the time. And then my first big solo trip actually was 2 years ago in 2022. I decided I just really wanted to go to Norway. I wanted to do some really epic hikes that had been on my bucket list for a while. It felt like a rather safe country. Like I feel like the Nordics are very safe, very English speaking, as opposed to I might have been a lot more nervous if my first solo trip was to like Mexico and there's a language barrier and it's like known for being a little more unsafe.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Anyway, I kind of did that on purpose where I was like, I want to be an English speaking country. I want to be somewhere that's relatively safe, easy to get around. So I picked Norway, went for 2 weeks, and I had a great time. I really enjoyed that I was open to just doing whatever I wanted to do instead of kind of catering to the lowest common denominator between me and a travel partner or like a group of friends. Because I think it can be a quite difficult thing when I feel like you all get to an age as an adult where everyone has a limited amount of time off of work, everyone has a limited budget, and everyone has different priorities. So even though you might love spending time with your friends at home, you guys might have very different travel styles. Like, I just have found that that is true over and over again. So I actually don't prefer to travel with my best friends usually. It's almost better to do what I've been doing where I just say like, this is the itinerary I'm doing. Does anyone want to join and like be part of this group that I'm leading? But anyway, like regarding solo travel, I think that is one of the best parts of solo travel, is that you get to do whatever you want. You're not having to make compromises with someone else. Like, you can make a plan of like an outline of what you think you're going to do, but also if you wake up one day and decide that you want to do something else, you can also just do that. I think it's very liberating in that way. And because you're not traveling with a friend that's constantly like occupying your conversation, you have so much more freedom to meet people, meet locals, actually really get into a conversation with like an open-mindedness that you just wouldn't really have if you had to be like, oh, well, like, I don't know if my friend wants to sit down and have dinner with this random person we just met. Maybe we should just do something with the two of us. Like, I just find that whenever I've solo traveled, I've met some really cool people because I'm just open to chatting because I don't really have anything better to do. So especially on this most recent trip to South Africa, I found that South Africans are so, so friendly, like way more so than any other culture I've ever personally experienced. And I thought that was really refreshing because it could be something as simple as just getting in the Uber, where I'm only going to be in the car for like 5 to 10 minutes, maybe from the airport to my hotel. But I could just strike up a conversation, or the driver themselves would strike up a conversation. And we would really get into some deep topics just in the span of a few minutes. Like, I would be asking them, like, what is it like growing up here? Like, did you live through the times of apartheid? What was that like? Like, because you can really just talk to someone who's lived through history in a lot of these countries where really pivotal events only happened like 30, 40 years ago. I found it super interesting in South Africa to really get into a conversation with my waiters, my drivers, my scuba instructors, my safari tour guides, like anyone who would listen was so open and willing to talk about their culture, to talk about the racial differences in the country, to talk about the history, to talk about the economic struggles. Like, I just felt like in some cultures, those types of questions are a little taboo and people
Yeah,
don't.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, but I felt like, I don't know if it's just South African culture or the way that I asked those questions in a very like friendly, non-judgmental, like good energy type of way that maybe made people feel comfortable to open up. But I had such great deep conversations, and I felt like I really got to know the country through talking to the local people rather than just by visiting museums or by reading about it online, which is normally how you kind of get to know a country if you don't have any local connections. So I just found it really refreshing, and I think it's so valuable that I spent 5 whole weeks there, had time to dictate my own schedule completely by myself. And even just the fact that it's an English speaking country, like everyone in South Africa speaks English. That I think alone is a game changer, because I obviously don't speak every language in the world. So sometimes it is hard to really get a local perspective on things if you can only speak with people who are educated enough to know English or educated enough to work in the tourism industry.
I totally agree with what you said. It's very interesting because regarding solo traveling, I remember we were talking about this when we met, that everybody has their own life. I mean, like, we are in our mid-20s, everybody's doing their own thing. Some people are studying, some friends are traveling around the world, other friends have already a house and like some partner. And it's so different. It's so different. I mean, if I focus on my friends, for example, each of us are doing a completely different thing. Like, one of my friends is a teacher, another one of my friends, he's a lawyer, then I'm living in Slovakia, you're traveling the world. It's like so different. So I totally agree with you on that. That's when you are solo traveling, it's very freeing. Like, you can choose what to do. Yeah, like, you can really improvise. I think I love that as well. Like, for example, my first solo trip was to the north of Spain, which I really recommend you to travel to. It's very beautiful. And I remember that I was there for maybe like 3 days, and I was on my 20s. I think I was like 21, if I remember properly, or 20. And it was amazing because only for 3 days there, I didn't really have a plan. I went just like around the coast, and all of a sudden, some person proposed me to go on a boat trip, like on a little boat trip around the coast, and I was like, "Yeah, why not? Like, why not?" And it was a lovely experience. And maybe if I would have traveled with some friend, I wouldn't have be able to do that, because my friend would start saying probably like, no, I don't feel like it, let's do some chill plan. I feel like traveling with friends is a bit overrated sometimes.
Yeah.
I think so. That's yeah, it feels like, for example, that you have some expectations about it, like, oh, I'm going to travel with my best friend, it's going to be the best trip ever, and then it's not really like that. Because
Yeah, I
your
find
best friend wants to
if
do
you
something. Yeah,
if you travel with a friend and you're not aligned on the purpose of the trip, and you think just because you get along fine in general, you're going to get along on the trip, that just is not true. Like, even people's standards of comfort, like whether you want to stay in like a really cheap place that's just a bed to sleep in versus like you like having aesthetic Airbnbs or hotels. Like, I personally place no value on what the room that I'm sleeping in looks like. Like, I could care less. I'm comfortable sleeping on a couch if I have a friend in a city that I'm visiting who wants to host me. Like, that's fine. I will not spend like hundreds plus dollars on a hotel overnight, but some people find that for them to be able to enjoy travel, they need those types of comforts. So I think beyond just you being friends with someone, you have to understand, like, do you have the same levels of comforts? Do you have the same types of activities you enjoy? Like, you could enjoy just getting dinner with someone in your hometown and like catching up and talking as friends, but when you're in Italy, are you going to want to just eat great food, or are you going to not want to spend any money on food at all and just cook your own food? Are you going to want to go to the mountains? Are you going to want to just go to museums? Like, people have completely different preferences with how to spend their time. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be friends, but it does mean that you shouldn't be travel partners.
exactly. I totally agree on that. It happened to me that even after some trips, it was over. Like the friendship, it
I
wasn't
have
really.
had that happen too.
Yeah.
It's so bad, but yeah, it's tragic when that happens because it really does just break a friendship sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you say, that traveling is very. I don't really know if there's some word to describe it, but um, it's flexible. I will say, like, everybody decides. It can be the same place. Like, you could travel to Iceland, for example, but if I travel to Iceland, it will be a completely different experience. And I also think that it really makes the trip different if you go either alone or with some friends. I think that's, I don't know what you think about this, but have you experienced in the group trips that you organize, for example, does the people make the trip more exciting, let's say, or interesting than even the place where you are at?
Completely. And actually, Iceland's a great example because I led a group trip to Iceland this past September, but I had previously been to Iceland with my high school friends. And I think even though our itineraries and the places we visited were pretty much the same on both of the times I've been to Iceland, the people were so different. And I think the people really do make the place. That is a recurring true theme I've noticed in trips. Like, whether you're by yourself or with a partner or with a few close friends or in a larger group of like random people who may be strangers that you're meeting for the first time, like it often is in a group trip, that determines so much of like the experience on the trip. Like, I think when I went to Iceland recently, there were so many people who saw things in a different way than I would have seen it myself, or who got excited about different things that I wouldn't have necessarily gotten excited about myself, but their excitement made me excited. And then
Mhm.
I think you do just experience a place and a specific location, a specific meal differently depending on who you're with. And especially when I was in Iceland most recently, the whole group had never seen the Northern Lights before, and I had only seen them like once or twice just the week prior because I was coming from Greenland. But it was so special and magical to witness everyone getting super excited about seeing the Northern Lights at the same time. So there is something very special to being in a group and having a shared moment. And I think you just can't always recreate that when solo traveling. Like, sure, you can stay in a hostel or like reach out to people and like meet people along the way when you solo travel. Like, that does happen quite often. But you can't always guarantee that you're going to be in a group of like-minded people or that you're going to meet anyone that you really vibe with at all if you just go on a trip alone, which is why I love more so entering a trip with a really like-minded travel buddy or with a group, because I just know I'm going to enjoy it more than if I was alone pretty much 90% of the time.
Exactly. I think that's so important. That's, for example, I want to go to a lot of countries, but I rather, now thinking about it, that I'm like 27, I'm thinking I rather wait and find like the moment, the money, the budget, and as well somebody to go with, or decide to go on my own and really plan the trip. And for me, the accommodation is important only to sleep comfortable. I don't care, like you were saying, about that is an aesthetic Airbnb or a hotel. I don't care about that. Or I would even stay in a hostel. But I think that with some people, for example, I wanted to go to Vienna, that is very close to Slovakia. You get the bus and you are there in like 2 hours, 3 hours. And the border with Vienna from Slovakia is very, very close. It's like half an hour by bus or car. So I went there with a friend and it was such a lovely trip, but my friend didn't want to spend any money. You know, like it was a different vibe on the trip, but it was such a lovely city. Vienna is amazing. So I think so that after some experiences from my trips, I really, really want to wait, for example, to plan some big trip, like to go to, I don't know, to the Philippines, for example. It's a lovely trip that I would love to do, or to Hawaii, or some really far place from where I live. I think I rather wait. Like, have you experienced something like this? Does your travel experience has changed through the years from when you started traveling to now?
I do think my travel style has changed. I would say just generally, mostly because my budget has changed. That has dictated how my travel style has changed. Like, I think when I was in college, I would sleep in a hostel every single night just because it's the cheapest way. Like, I would rather go than have to say no because of my budget. Now I'm at a point where like travel has become such a big part of my life that it is the thing that I save for. It is the thing that I want most of my budget to go towards, and I'm comfortable with that. So, like, I just also value actually getting a full night's sleep, being able to get up early and like not have to worry about my stuff in a shared room. So, like, I find myself doing hostels less and less, but still, I'm not splurging for like a hotel room. I'm just splurging for like the cheapest possible private Airbnb. So that's like one way that my travel style has changed. I also just like already have so many friends around the world that it's already hard enough to keep up with the friends that I do have. So I don't even really go into hostels for the idea of meeting new people because it's kind of just exhausting to think about meeting more people.
I totally get that.
Yeah, like I'm 26 now. I was traveling when I first started at like 19 through 20, and you're just in such a different phase of life. Like now I value my alone time. I have friends back home that I would rather just be in a quiet space to like FaceTime when I'm traveling. So like definitely the way I think about accommodations and where to stay has changed, but also even just the types of destinations I choose has changed. Like I am such a big fan now of like extreme adventure travel. Like I love scuba diving, hiking, trekking, getting out into the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, like remote places very far from a city are like more appealing to me in some ways because I've seen so many cities. And I also felt that when I was seeing all the cities in like Western Europe kind of back to back to back, after a while I'm like, they kind of all feel the same. Like obviously they're not the same, but especially when you're doing them in rapid succession, you're like, okay, like every city walking tour is like similar enough. And even when I went to Asia, I also felt like I had a bit of travel fatigue from just like so many Buddhist temples. Like they're beautiful all in their own right, but if you're seeing them like back to back to back, week after week, you're just kind of like, I don't really care about another temple. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think in the beginning, I would say that my travel style at the beginning was kind of me doing typical tourist things. Like I'd go to Paris and London and check off the things you're kind of supposed to see. Now I get way more excited about things that are off the beaten path that like I have no idea what to expect. Like I was so excited last year to go to Greenland because I just don't know anyone who's been there. I didn't know anything what to expect, and it was so mind-blowing in that way, rather than going to a city that you've seen on Instagram a million times. Or even like I feel like Bali is this way too, where like everyone's been there. It's so
Absolutely.
oversaturated. Like I have no curiosity about it because it's already been shoved down my throat. Like I'm just not that interested in going to a place that I've already seen online a million times. And I think a lot of us feel that way because this like oversaturation of travel and tourism content and like Instagram influencers has become a big thing in the past couple of years, especially. So I think this new renaissance of like, I want off the beaten path, like very unique experiences and destinations is what a lot of people are more, it piques your interest more. Like even this past summer, I went to France, I went to London, but the things that like I was posting about that people seemed the most interested in was when I went to like the Baltic countries, like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. Like no one's really talking about those countries and they're not on most people's like bucket lists. But I think for people who are interested in actually learning about history and just like niche cultural things that you don't already know enough about, I had so many people replying that were so interested in the stories I was posting about those places. So I do think there's this growing trend that I reflect in my own travel experiences of like, I want to learn something new rather than just check off the things I'm like supposed to be taking a picture in front of, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think very much like you regarding trips and my traveling style as well. Because I didn't really have a big budget to travel when I started. And what I knew, I know I commented on your Instagram story that you manifested kind of like when you wrote when you were little on your diary. I think that you wrote like, I want to travel to this many countries, or I want to write a book about my adventures, and it came true. So for me, it was like, I want to live in different countries. And when I
Yeah.
think about it, it's like, okay, I haven't traveled to a lot of countries, but I've traveled around most of Ireland when I lived in Ireland as an au pair. That was such a beautiful adventure. And I got to know a lot of people as well, and a different culture. Now I'm living in Slovakia, which is amazing, very interesting. The nature is beautiful here. The people have such a chill style of life. Like they are very connected to nature as well. The food is amazing here, and it's so interesting. So I think it's very interesting that you are traveling most of the year, I will say, around the world, and you are getting to know the different cultures and getting to know the people. I think it's such an enriching experience for you.
I agree. No, and I mean, that's the main reason why I travel. I am such a believer that the best way to learn and grow as a person is through travel, because not only are you physically displacing yourself and just in a new environment, you're meeting new people, you're having new ideas, you're trying new things, you're trying new foods. Like, you're just injecting so much randomness and serendipity into your life that you wouldn't have if you stayed put where you were before. So I think everywhere you go really does shape who you are and adds to the way that you think about the world, the way you think about yourself. And yeah, I do feel like I wouldn't be the person I am if I didn't take those risks and book those trips and just do things that scare me. And I actually really do feel like because I've done so many things that kind of would be considered scary or like nerve-wracking, there's very few things that actually scare me anymore because I can just think back and be like, well, like it's not that crazy to do this because I've already done this other crazy thing, like, you know?
Yeah, I totally understand you. Like, for example, when I first was traveling alone to Ireland to be an au pair, it was scary. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, Ireland has always been in my top list with like Iceland and New Zealand, Australia. But it was like Jesus, I'm like, I think I was 20 or 21, and I was going on my own to live in a different country, to live in somebody else's house, to work there. But it was, of course, it has its up and downs, like everything, I guess. But it was so beautiful. I'm still in contact with the host family. I'm still in contact with some of the friends that were also au pairs that I met through the 3.5 years I was there. And it's such an amazing experience that's, well, it's so different when you have the vision of traveling to a country and then when you really spend a lot of time in the country traveling and then living in the country. I think that's so different because we have like some expectations, of course, like for example, about traveling to Ireland, the cliffs of Moher, and then this and that. But when you're living there, it's like, okay, the weather is not that good, and then the conditions that you have, or maybe the food, or it's so different. It's so different to live in the country
Completely.
rather than traveling, for example.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And about South Africa, it's so interesting to me. For example, about the culture, what is something that you learned?
Honestly, there's just so many facets of the culture in South Africa. Like, I think the country is very much shaped by the indigenous people. The country is also very much shaped by the colonial era because a lot of Africa was dramatically changed when, like, the Portuguese, the British, the Dutch, like, everyone just kind of came in and started taking their little pieces of the pie, so to speak. And then it was also really shaped by the resistance movements that combated colonialism. So there's just like so many eras of the history to really understand, to understand the depth of the culture that has been shaped through all of these different events throughout history. But I also think everyone is just so welcoming and so open. And I think that is a common trend I've noticed in just a lot of African cultures, especially South Africa though. Like I met this one driver who needed I needed a 10-hour long trip and I was not going to rent a car and do it myself because they drive on the other side of the road. I don't really drive in general. Like I was just not going to do that. So I hired a driver and he drove with me for 10 hours and we talked the whole time. So I really got to know him. And then he was like just such a fan of me and like I'm an author and I'm young and I'm traveling and I'm living my life. And he was just so proud that when we got back to my destination, which was his hometown as well, he was like, let me take you on a tour around my town for free. Like he showed me the petting zoo, the river, the barber shop. I'm like, these aren't tourist destinations, but they are things that really show you what local life is like there. So I was so grateful to even just walk through a grocery store in his small little town and like just notice the differences between how things run there versus how things are that I consider normal back home. So I had literally just met him like a few days before, and he invited me into his home, introduced me to his mom, his dog, his
That's so amazing.
cousins, like the whole town. It was just like so incredible. I really enjoyed everything. And I think that is such a testament to South African culture that it is so welcoming, so open, and like so willing to help. Like genuinely, I never actually felt threatened. And that is because I took the precautions to stay in very safe areas. Like I think a lot of South Africa is just impoverished and a lot of petty crimes happen because of just the sheer lack of economic means. But if you're around the right people in the safe areas, like I just cannot say enough amazing things about the country and its people and the culture.
That's so amazing. I believe that, as you mentioned many times in our conversation, like it's so interesting to get to know a country through a local. Because, for example, I remember when I traveled to Croatia, which is very close from Slovakia. When I traveled to Croatia with my friend, it was so interesting to just wander around, like to go to the local supermarket. It really feels like I'm not a local, but I kind of feel like a local now. Like it's so interesting as well what you said about this like bucket list places, destinations that everybody's going to Bali. All the Spanish influencers are going there, or to Maldives. It's like I don't really want to go anymore. It's like it's not special anymore. It's
Yeah.
the massive tourism, or as well in Spain, in the islands, or in Barcelona, Madrid. There's like too much tourism that as a Spanish person, for example, I know what months I need to avoid some parts of my country because of the tourism. Or as well, for example, when you get to know Ireland, when I was living there, I got to know Ireland through my family. And
Mm,
that's such a different experience, because if not, I would have gone to Dublin and Cliffs of Moher, and that's it. But Ireland is such an amazing and diverse country. And it's so interesting that there is history literally everywhere.
yeah.
Like, you go through a forest and all of a sudden you find a dolmen and it's like, okay, what is this? Or the history around it, the folklore in Ireland, it's so, so, so amazing. And
Mhm.
I wouldn't have known that myself if it wasn't for my host family there, because
Yeah.
the locals, they know the little places. Or like in Slovakia, when I show you here, you went off the beaten path, took I
Yeah,
don't know how many trains to get there. But
exactly.
it's a very well-known castle, Bonice here, and it's so beautiful. It's like a fairy tale castle. But even the locals don't really know their country here in Slovakia. Like Tatra Mountains, I recommend you to travel there. They are so beautiful. I want to go there. And you can go ski, and it really feels like you are in Canada with the lakes, the mountains, the views. The scenery is so beautiful. But I really feel that the people don't really get to know their country that much, and they are starting kind of like these last few years to get to know their own country. I feel that in my Spanish friends, they're traveling more around Spain, not
Mhm.
really to the typical, let's say, destinations. Like, you want to go to Iceland to see what everybody is doing, or the same itinerary in Bali or Philippines, or at least from my Spanish friends, they were all kind of doing the same trips. But then they my friends are really like now traveling, for example, more around Spain, the villages, getting to know the different little places, the culture, seeing the monuments that you don't really see as touristic. I think that's so, so interesting.
Yeah, it's true. I agree.
And for example, to change the topic about concerts, what was the last concert that you went to? Or
Um, I went to a Maggie Rogers concert in New York City at Madison Square Garden back in September. I don't really have many concert options when I'm traveling in these like off the beaten path places, but prior to that, I had also seen Taylor Swift's The Eras Tour in London.
amazing. And what was your first concert? Do you remember?
Yeah, my first concert was very iconic. I was like 8 years old. I wanted to see Hannah Montana on the
Oh
same
my
tour where she was like Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus on the same tour, and the Jonas Brothers were opening. So iconic. Like every
God.
8-year-old's dream at the time.
I envy you so much right now.
Like
I
Hannah Montana doesn't
remember.
exist anymore. I got to see
Yeah,
her.
Miley really needs to do an Eras tour. Like, I will pay, I don't care,
That'd be
1,000 if it's
iconic. Really.
necessary. That's so amazing. That's so amazing. But do you remember the concert really, as you were
I
8 years
do.
old?
No, I actually wrote a whole essay about it. Like when we in the US, when you apply to colleges, you write like an essay that's like your
Yeah.
personal essay about like how you became who you are type of thing. And one of my first drafts, not the one I ended up submitting, but one of my first drafts was I remember being in a room with 20,000 other people like at a concert for the first time, and I just found that sense of community so overwhelmingly like shocking in a good way, that there were this many people in a room who all care about the same thing, who all love this thing enough to like know all the lyrics by heart and spend their money, spend their time, dress up, go all the way there, because we had to travel to get there. Actually, it wasn't even really near where I lived. So it just was such a memorable moment to be like, okay, I like music. I've always known that. But so do all these other people. And there's something so special about music that makes us all come to the same place at the same time, sing the same words, like share this experience. And I think that's the thing that I love about both travel and like concerts is there's such high points of life. They're like the big amazing memories. And I think I love developing my life in such a way that I have as many of those peak moments as possible. And like a trip and a concert are always going to be those things that you remember. So I just love doing that as many times as possible.
Yeah, I understand you so much because for me it's exactly the same. Like my highlights, I will say, are trips that I've done either with friends or living in different countries, and as well concerts. Like I don't really remember my first concert, but it was probably like Ed Sheeran or, well, I don't count the Spanish artists, but in some, like in some village that doesn't really count to me as a concert. But I think so that it was like Ed Sheeran was my first solo concert. And I remember as well that I wanted to go to many concerts, but I was kind of like afraid of going on my own. At the time, I was like 17, 16, 17. And then I was like, you know what? Like, if nobody's going, I'm going. I'm not missing any more artists. Like, I remember Melanie Martinez was coming for the
Yeah.
first time to Spain, and nobody was coming. Like, my friends don't really share my music style. And
Mhm.
I was like, I regret so much not seeing her in concert. So then when she came again, I was like, okay, I'm going on my own. And I just started kind of like going on my own through different concerts, like Ed Sheeran, I remember Halsey, Imagine Dragons, Bastille, and it was such an amazing experience. Like I really, really, really understand what you mean about when you said it. I got goosebumps. Like the
Yeah.
feeling of the concert, it's something so amazing. Like you are there listening to the same artist, the songs of the artist kind of like mm, go with you in some phases of your life. Like they are really helping you, and they also help other people, and we are all in the same room. And also discovering the supporting acts, I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Like I remember in one Bastille concert, Luis Capaldi was the supporting act.
Oh, amazing.
He wasn't even well known, and
Mhm.
I thought that he was a group. And
Yeah.
I posted it like, oh, such an amazing group, they are so funny, this is Scottish group. And I was like, it's Luis Capaldi now, like now he's super famous. And at the time he wasn't well known. He didn't even have like one of the singles that is so famous now. I think it's so interesting to go to concerts in different venues as well. Like, it, have you experienced any concert? Because in the United States, I guess that is not very common really to see some artists in a small venue first, because they kind of get big. That's what I feel, at least.
I mean, I saw Billie Eilish in a room of 200 people before anyone knew who she was. Yeah.
That's so amazing. But I really feel like that for me, being European, as a teenager, a lot
Mhm.
of the American culture, like the pop culture, was very, very big in Spain.
Yeah.
I remember that Halsey was doing stadiums in the United States, but she came to Spain to do a small venue of, I don't know how much people, but it was such an amazing experience. They are doing stadiums in the United States or around the world even, but they come to Spain and it's like they are not well known. They are playing for a small venue. And a
Yeah.
lot of artists were saying that it was so different the experience to that they felt kind of like starting.
Yeah. No, it's really sweet to have a very intimate space. Like, I love a good stadium show with lights and dancers and everything, but I also love small, intimate shows where you just actually can be so close to the artist and they kind of feel everyone in the room instead of just playing to this like shadow of a
Yeah,
stadium, you know?
absolutely, absolutely. And we have to talk about this. When you met Taylor on the
Yeah.
Secret Sessions, how was that experience? How did it happen? Because I think so that at the time it was with the 1989 album.
Yeah, so she had that contest during the 1989 era when you like could buy a bunch of CDs and one or some of them had like a golden ticket basically inside to get a meet and greet with her. So that was like the way in which I met her, super random. But yeah, I got to go early to the show, pick up my like VIP package at the box office, and then got to go where the backstage area is, wait a bit, and then just she had like a line of people who had all won these like radio meet and greets or whatever, and everyone just got a few minutes to hang out with her. And she's so kind. Like as soon as I walked into the room, I was obviously like a bit starstruck, but as soon as she sees me, she's like, "Oh my God, you look gorgeous." And I'm like, "Why are you telling me that?"
Yeah.
She's just so kind, and she's so tall. Like she genuinely was a full head taller than me when we took a picture of each other. She's so tall, and she was wearing heels. But she's so sweet. I was like trying to get words out and was trying to tell her like, "Oh, I really love your music. Like I just started learning guitar. I learned how to play You Belong With Me." And she's like, "Oh, that's amazing." And then I don't even know what we talked about, honestly. But I handed her like a letter, and then she gave like a little autograph, and it was very, very quick. I mean, you have to like keep moving along in a line, but she's just genuinely so kind and caring towards her fans. She is an incredible artist and person in that way. And I think that's why I respect people like her and like Ed Sheeran, who like clearly care about their fans and don't act like they're too good or don't need their fans. Like there are celebrities out there who act that way, and I just have no respect for them and can't vehemently support them in the way that like I will always support Ed or Taylor, even if I don't like their newer music or like if I don't love a particular album, I'll still support them just because they're good people, and like good people deserve success and ungrateful people honestly don't.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've done so many things, like you've traveled around many countries and been to concerts. And I think so, if I remember properly, this is many, many years ago. You went to the Grammys or something like that.
I worked for the Grammys during college, so I won like an opportunity to go be a seat filler at the Grammys, which means that you can go to the Grammys as a college student, like working for the Grammys, and you're not actually doing anything. You're just sitting in the seats when the celebrities get up to go to the bathroom or go get a drink because they don't want empty seats on camera. So I got to, at the very beginning, I was sitting right behind Billie Eilish. I was sitting right behind John Legend and Chrissy Teigen. I was sitting right behind Vampire Weekend. Like they moved me around throughout the night to just fill the empty seats. It was such a random but fun experience. I loved it.
That's so interesting. What will you consider the highlights of your life, like till now, about trips, concerts, experiences, meeting new
Oh.
people, countries?
I do really feel very lucky that I have had so many that it makes it hard to choose. I really think it was quite special for me. Like I always have wanted to write a book. So it was very, very special for me to finally like hold my own book in my hands. And then even the fact that when I wrote my book and published it, I had a pre-sale list of like a couple hundred people. So I had like a stack of hundreds of books, and I got to like sign all of them with my signature. And like I had always as a kid, just like when I was bored in class, was like practicing my signature for like one day when I'm famous, and just actually getting to sign like 300 books at once was such a peak moment of my life of like, wow, not only did I put in the effort to like make this book a reality, but also enough people cared to order like and pay extra for a signed copy directly from me. I was like, that is just the best thing ever.
That's so amazing. And I would like to ask you, if you don't want to talk about money, just say it. But I think that is so interesting. I saw some Instagram stories that you posted about your budget and how people think, well, some people might think like, oh, this person is traveling around the world, they have it easy. They, like maybe their family pays their trips. And I know that you worked really, really hard. You've done some sacrifices, like working at an early age and all of this. So can you tell a bit of your story and some advice to kind of like save up for trips or do your
Yeah.
budget?
I do think it is such a long-term goal type of thing. Like you can't think, oh, by next month, I'm going to save up enough money to go take a trip, or even by the end of this year. Like you have to think in years, not think in days or weeks or months to accomplish big goals. And I think I just always knew I wanted to travel, so I filled all of my time. Like I would have a job and have a second job handing out flyers and have a third job like volunteering at this random thing to get some sort of pay, or like I would just fill every spare hour of my day with some way that I could like earn money for my time or like reduce my costs. And I was very willing to like rough it. Like I lived in the cheapest possible apartment with no air conditioning in New York City. I would not live in the city if I was interning. I would take the bus every single day from my parents' house in Jersey. And like that is so annoying to do, but it is so worth it because I saved thousands of dollars instead of paying rent. I also like I took budget airlines. I slept in hostels. I slept on airport floors. Like people don't talk about this when they see like, oh,
Exactly.
you've been to 97 countries. You must be rich. Like no, actually all of that, most of it was a struggle. And like leading up to the travel, I was working my butt off. Like not only was I in school, but I was working full-time internships while I was in school, and like I wouldn't let myself buy a lot of nice clothes or this or that. Like I'm very much of the mentality that like I will spend on experiences, like I will spend on food because I think that is like worth my time as well to not have to like cook and clean, but I will not spend on luxury goods. I do not buy things that I don't need. I just like decline a lot of conveniences. Like I don't pay for Ubers. I'd rather walk. Like even I'd rather walk than take the subway. Like even the smallest little expenses, I was reducing my expenses as much as possible for years, while also like having a very determined mindset that like yes, I would love to do something I enjoy, but my actual top priority is balancing something I can tolerate and like maybe one day enjoy with something that will give me a paycheck and work-life balance that enables me to travel. So like I could have like followed my passion and just done something that's like not going to earn a lot of money, but I strategically figured out like out of some of the top paying jobs, what is one that still gives me work-life balance? Like I didn't go into banking or consulting and try to work like 100 hours a week, but I figured out tech, which I went into after graduating, was this kind of sweet spot where I could work a normal 40-hour work week, but I was still getting paid like almost just as much as like a banking or consulting salary and not having to sacrifice my life. So I just always very strategically was like, how can I maximize my income while eliminating or like reducing my expenses? And after like years of doing that, I saved up like pretty much half my paycheck for years and just lived in the cheapest apartment I could find, was always trying to find a subletter if I was traveling for long enough, was always taking the bus or public transit instead of Ubering. Like just all of that culminates in a way that now I've been traveling full time for 9 months and not working. I'm living off of my savings, but I also invested all of those savings so that I'm actually really not losing any money at all, which is really a crazy place to be. But yeah, that's hard work for years. Like I had this goal starting like 10 years ago when I started working.
Exactly. Thank you for being so open about it, because I feel like most people just want to show, most people, I mean like most travel influencers being specific, that's my reference are Spanish travel influencers. They don't get to the money part, like they are not really that transparent. Like, yeah,
Mm.
I worked. My parents are not paying this. I'm working while I'm traveling. Like, so thank you for being so open about it, because I feel like it's very important to share the reality, the ups and downs, the work and the effort that you put into this, because it's not just like, oh, I travel like 91 or 95 countries like you did. It's like, no, like I worked for years, saving up so much money, working 1 2 3 jobs, reducing my expenses and everything. I feel like that's such an important message. And
It's true.
to finish the podcast about your book, You Are Where You Go, how would you describe it? I will, by the way, leave it on the link, the description
Yeah,
box.
for sure. I would call it a memoir that talks about the intersection of travel and personal development, because it is a large part of what I wanted to write, is how every place I've been isn't just amazing, but those places shaped me to be who I am, and I learned so much from travel. I think that's my main mission and kind of message to people, is that travel does not have to be just visiting and collecting beautiful places. Travel is actually putting yourself into situations that challenge you and force you to grow and force you or encourage you to think about the world and yourself differently. And I think just having that intention behind travel to say, I could just go to another beach, but instead let me go to Abu Dhabi and like learn about the Islamic world that I have no idea and I feel very uncomfortable with because I didn't grow up in that environment. But let me go there. Let me expose myself to it. Let me challenge myself to be uncomfortable and sit in that discomfort and actually figure out what I learned from it. Like that's an example of like one of the chapters in my book of a place that I went and what I learned from it through putting myself into like a very different, uncomfortable situation. I think that's how you learn and grow. So I think anyone who wants to travel, or even if you can't travel right now, but you want to be able to learn through someone else's experiences, I meant the book as both inspiration and just like pure education to learn from me if you're not able to actually travel yourself yet.
That's absolutely amazing. So inspiring.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
You're more than welcome. So I will leave your social media on the description box on Spotify for people who are listening and on YouTube as well. And thank you very much for being in my podcast. I'm so excited to talk with you as a friend, of course, as well.
Yeah.
As I learn from you. And I think that you lead such an amazing life that I honestly look up to, like
Oh,
traveling.
thank you. It means a lot.
Yeah, the challenges through your trips, and that is not just like, oh, I'm going to the next trip and the next trip and the next trip, like you really learn from it and have a personal development
Yeah,
along with it. That's so amazing.
for sure. Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay, yay. That was fun.
One moment, please. Done.